Welcome to the Veterinary Services Field Operations Cooperative Agreement Guide webinar. This webinar covers field operations specific policies. Please ensure you have reviewed the APHIS Agreement Services Center recipient training on cooperative agreements and grants prior to attending this webinar. The link to that training is available on the resources slide towards the end of this presentation. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Stephanie Kozar. I am the VS Field Operations Cooperative Agreements Team Supervisor. When programmatic questions arise, please contact your area veterinarian in charge, also known as the AVIC. When administrative questions arise, please contact the grant specialist or specialists for your district designated in this chart. Please keep in mind this is the current cooperative agreement team breakdown. This breakdown can change, and if we do determine we need to make changes, we will let the AVIC know. As an aside, we refer to the VS programmatic contact interchangeably as the AVIC or Program Manager, which is sometimes abbreviated to PM. When in doubt, you can always go to your AVIC for questions or use the Agreements Team group email listed at the bottom of this slide and on the final slide of this presentation. The grant specialists listed here will be assisting me with this presentation today.
There are a number of recent changes for you to be aware of. On October 1st, 2024, 2 CFR Part 200, which governs cooperative agreements, was significantly updated. These changes have been updated in the VS Field Operations Recipient Guide, and a few are listed below, but it is important for your organization to familiarize itself with all the changes. Two significant changes in the CFR that have been captured in the guide are the per unit threshold for equipment was raised from $5,000 to $10,000, and the de minimis rate was raised from 10% to 15%. Other VS Field Operations Recipient Guide updates include yearly evaluation criteria added, clarification that the AHA meeting attendee cap is applicable to both travel and registrations, reformatting of program sections. The Avian program is requesting that you complete your goals in DIS in addition to using the goals worksheet, updated sheep-goat reporting template, updated workbooks to reflect changes and updated dates, and an agreement awarding timeline has been added to the workflows appendix. Please refer to the yearly guidance email for a list of deadlines along with a link to the VS Field Operations Recipient Guide for the current year. We will continue to use the work and financial plan templates, which together form the workbook. Please ensure your cooperative agreement is rounded to a whole US dollar amount. Lourdes will be reviewing the templates further into this presentation. We continue to use US whole dollar amounts in the funding chart on the first page of the umbrella work plan. A funding breakdown by program in US dollars must be submitted with each umbrella claim. And once the umbrella workbook is approved and the cooperative agreement is awarded, shifting of any amount between programs is not authorized. This shifting restriction resulted from findings in a recent OIG audit and is required as a result of funding being allocated to field operations designated for a specific species. We are required to ensure the funding is utilized for its designated species when awarded to a recipient. Your organization is expected to adhere to and comply with all of the policies and procedures outlined in the recipient guide for that fiscal year throughout the entire agreement period if you receive funding from VS Field Operations. Finally, we want to reiterate our commitment to providing you with the best support possible. VS will evaluate cooperative agreements annually during the first quarter of the fiscal year and may adjust funding levels due to alignment with agency needs, budgetary restrictions, changing dynamics of industry and trade, or changes in policy using but not limited to the following metrics for the previous 3-year period. Size and value of the livestock industry in the state compared to other states utilizing the most recent National Agricultural Statistics Service data. Cooperator agreement activity alignment with veterinary services mission and goals, particularly disease surveillance and response. Highly aligned cooperative agreements support conducting significant and cost-effective surveillance for diseases regulated by APHIS in a state or multi-state region compared to all other cooperative agreements. Cooperator status of outbreak preparedness and response activities, including information management and deployable asset capacity. For example, trained responders within IMT structure and EMERS trained assets. Highly aligned cooperative agreements are those that build or maintain a significant level of preparedness to respond to foreign and emerging diseases of livestock and poultry in a state or region compared to all other cooperative agreements. And past cooperative agreement performance, including history of spending obligated funds and fulfillment of work plan objectives and reporting requirements.
This diagram illustrates the estimated umbrella and traceability cooperative agreement awarding timeline. Generally speaking, in May, we request the preferred funding breakdown from recipients so we can build our budget plan for the next fiscal year. In November, we release the yearly recipient guide. In December, we allow an opportunity for recipients to request modifications to the funding breakdowns they provided in May, closer to the award start date. Modifications are not guaranteed, and we will notify you if they are approved. In January, workbooks are due from recipients. A majority of the umbrella and traceability agreements start April 1st. This date can change if the prior year award was extended or the recipient cannot participate in the pre-award letter process, and we have passed April 1st. In that case, the award will start date of final signature. Please note, this timeline is a guide and is subject to change.
Next, we will cover some pre-award information. Specifically, we will discuss applicant eligibility requirements, establishing user roles in EasyFed grants, and the pre-award cost approval process.
In order to receive funding from VS Field Operations, you must have a unique entity identifier, or UEI, an active System for Award Management, or SAM.gov account, and USDA Level 2 e-authentication access to our online grants management system, EasyFed Grants, or EFG. Before applying for a cooperative agreement, please ensure your organization has registered or has an active account in SAM.gov. This is required in order to receive payments from Treasury. In order to register with SAM.gov, your organization will need a UEI. The SAM.gov website provides instructions on obtaining a UEI. SAM.gov registration requires annual renewal. Please be aware, SAM.gov is free of charge. Therefore, you should not need to pay to register or to renew your registration in SAM.gov. In addition to registering or renewing your registration in SAM.gov, please ensure you've completed the certifications and representations information and selected yes to the question, do you want to apply for federal assistance? We cannot process your application without the certification and representation section completed in SAM.gov. In order to apply for and manage your cooperative agreement, at least 2 individuals in your organization will need access to EasyFed grants, which requires obtaining and maintaining USDA Level 2 e-authentication. Your agency must have, at minimum, 1 grants administrative official, or GAO, and 1 signatory official, or SO, in EasyFed grants. All cooperative agreements are finalized through EasyFed grants. If you need access to the system, please reach out to your grant specialist, and we can provide you with step-by-step instructions for obtaining access. Lastly, please note applications for cooperative agreements will not be considered if there are any outstanding, delinquent, performance or financial reports from previous fiscal year cooperative agreements. So please ensure your reporting is current in the system before applying for a new cooperative agreement. This chart outlines the recipient primary user roles within EasyFed grants and what each role can do. As mentioned, you must have at least 1 GAO and 1 SO role, but it is best practice to have at least one backup in each role to ensure documents are not delayed. As you can see in this chart, the SO role is not able to create applications or claims. Each role has certifying official listed as secondary user role. The certifying official can review and sign claims and reports. This role applies to a specific report or claim and is designated by the individual who creates the claim or prepares the report. Any user can be a certifying official regardless of their primary role. Claim creators or report preparers can even designate themselves as the certifying officials of their own claims or reports. Lastly, you may notice repayment requests listed as an option in the role functions on this chart and as a menu option on the Easy FedGrants homepage. Repayment requests are a type of claim in which a recipient returns funds to the federal agency. These funds may have been overpaid reimbursements, unused advance payments, or prohibited or unjustified expenses. Currently, VS does not utilize this function in Easy FedGrants. If your organization needs to return funds, then please work with your grant specialist for this process. Pre-award costs are costs incurred prior to the date the cooperative agreement is fully executed. Recipients must submit a letter to the APHIS VS signatory official, SO, through the Area Veterinarian in Charge, AVIC, to obtain approval to incur pre-award costs. A link to the pre-award letter template can be found in Section 1 of the guide. The letter includes length of time, up to 90 days, for which these costs can be requested, a justification explaining programmatic need to begin incurring costs, and an estimate of costs to be incurred during the pre-award period, approximately 25% of the cooperative agreement amount. Reimbursement of pre-award costs is contingent upon a fully executed cooperative agreement. Therefore, claims cannot be processed until your cooperative agreement becomes active in Easy FedGrants. Easy FedGrants will issue the award face sheet once the cooperative agreement is active. Please note, verbal approval to enter into a cooperative agreement or incur costs is not valid and cannot be honored. In addition, if the 90-day pre-award period expires and an extension has not been approved, then the cooperative agreement start date will revert to the date of final signature, and any costs incurred prior to the start date of the cooperative agreement cannot be reimbursed. As mentioned earlier, please refer to the yearly guidance email for the pre-award letter submission deadline, but please note that submitted pre-award letters will not be processed until the last week of March and will only be processed if the cooperative agreement is unlikely to be fully signed by the April 1st start date. Now, I'm going to hand it over to Samantha to address the next topic, cost considerations.
Thank you, Stephanie. I will be going over cost considerations, cost definitions, allowable and unallowable costs, publications and audiovisuals or outreach materials, laboratory equipment requests, IT acquisition, and travel policies. These are the basic considerations of costs you must keep in mind when creating your financial plan. Costs must be allowable, allocable, and reasonable. To be considered allowable, costs must be reasonable to accomplish the project in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles, not used to meet cost sharing or matching of any other federally funded program, and are adequately documented. To be considered allocable, costs must be treated consistently by the applicant, incurred specifically for the project, beneficial to the project, and necessary to the overall operation. To be considered reasonable, the amount does not exceed what a prudent person, given the same circumstances, would expect to incur. A quick reference of common cost types can be found in the appendix section of the recipient guide. The different types of costs are direct costs, indirect costs, cost sharing, and cost matching. Direct costs includes costs for personnel, fringe benefits, travel, supplies, equipment, contractual, and other. Next are indirect costs. Indirect costs are costs of an organization which are not readily identifiable with a particular project or program, but nevertheless are necessary to the general operation of the organization and the conduct of its activities. APHIS has a statutory cap of 10% on indirect costs for nonprofit institutions. Nonprofit institutions include both private and public organizations such as colleges, universities, schools, hospitals, and others. Typically, state, local, and tribal governmental entities are not considered nonprofit. The statutory cap applies only to cooperative agreements. If the recipient's indirect cost rate is less than 10%, then their negotiated indirect cost rate applies. A de minimis rate of 15% may be applied if an organization has an expired negotiated indirect cost rate agreement. If claiming the de minimis rate, please contact your grant specialist. Lastly, if a recipient has a current signed indirect cost rate agreement, it must be submitted with the application when applying for a cooperative agreement. Cost sharing or cost matching, which can be found in 2 CFR Part 200.1, means the portion of the project costs not paid by federal funds unless otherwise authorized by federal statute. Veterinary Services has a legislative requirement of 40% cost share, cost match for brucellosis eradication activities. No other programs require a cost share or cost match. If the cost share ratio or cost match requirement is not met as stipulated in the cooperative agreement, action can be taken to 1. Reduce the next cooperative agreement, 2. Reduce APHIS's share proportionately, or 3. Allow the reduced cost share when it is in the best interest of the federal government. Once the cooperative agreement has expired, adjustments to a cost ratio cannot be approved. This slide helps determine allowable and unallowable costs. To find an explanation of allowable costs, you can use the following for your resources: 2 CFR Part 200, Appropriations, or the Current Fiscal Year Recipient Guide. Examples of unallowable costs are compensation and travel of federal employees, federal subawards, land acquisition, promotional, outreach and giveaway items such as calendars, pens, squishy balls, etc., vehicle purchases or leases, symposium, conference, meeting, workshop honoraria, research, construction and/or major rehabilitation of buildings, bonuses or commissions, fundraising, international travel. Also, please use the program-specific guidance in the recipient guide to determine if there are any additional restrictions to costs. When using agreement funds for publications and audiovisuals, please use existing materials. If new material is developed, it will need to be submitted to the program manager for additional levels of approval. You will be notified by the program manager of the final decision. Please allow a minimum of 2 weeks for review of materials, pamphlets, flyers, posters, etc. prior to printing. Approval must be obtained prior to printing. New this year, the agreement terms and conditions were updated to include a scholarly publications and digital scientific research data article that is located on page 13 and 14 in the terms and conditions. If you have any questions regarding this article, please email us at the agreement team mailbox. Equipment is defined as tangible personal property, including information technology systems, having a useful life of more than 1 year and a per unit value of $10,000 or more. If laboratory equipment is being requested, a laboratory equipment request form needs to be completed and can be found in the current fiscal year recipient guide. This form should be used for any laboratory equipment purchases for all programs. If applicable, please include the completed equipment request form when submitting your workbook. The term information technology includes, but is not limited to, computers, network and ancillary equipment, software, firmware, and similar procedures, services, including support services, and related resources. IT purchases may require an Acquisition Approval Request, or AAR, to be completed. If it is determined that an AAR is needed, estimate a 2-week turnaround for the review process. For general travel, travel costs should be specific to activities proposed in the workbook. Follow your state-written travel policies when calculating travel costs. If there is no state travel policy, then federal per diem rates should be used to estimate travel costs. For the Animal Health Association AHA meeting, either local, state, regional, or national, no more than 2 attendees per recipient per meeting combining umbrella and ADT cooperative agreements can be claimed. For the out-of-state meeting or conference travel cap for umbrella cooperative agreements, the cap is $10,000 or 7% of total federal funding amount, whichever is less. For ADT or other cooperative agreements, the cap is $5,000 or 7% of total federal funding amount, whichever is less. Items not subject to the travel cap are travel to attend trainings, workshops, and working groups, travel to attend AHA meetings within your state. For example, if an AHA meeting is within your state, it is not subject to your out-of-state travel cap. However, only 2 attendees maximum can be included or reimbursed through the cooperative agreement. Registration fees for conferences and meetings should be categorized as other in the financial plan. Additional justification needs to be provided to support an increase in AHA attendees or to raise the budgetary cap. Justification will need to be approved by the APHIS signatory official. Now Lourdes will walk us through the workbook.
Hello, my name is Lourdes Kramer, and in the next few slides, I'll go over both umbrella and animal disease traceability workbook templates. The concept and format of the workbooks have remained the same since their inception. The workbook templates will be used to create the work and financial plan, reduce the amount of time to review and approve work plans, be used throughout the life cycle of the cooperative agreement for accomplishment reporting, and create transparency to easily identify and ensure proposed activities are being performed. Here is a summary of what is included in the workbook templates. Although both may be similar, there are a few differences. Umbrella will consist of 2 workbook templates, a work plan and an accomplishment report template, and a financial plan template. New this year, the financial plan template will have a separate tab for each program and a combined tab that will automatically calculate the amounts for each tab, whereas ADT consists of 1 workbook template that has everything in it. Additionally, the ADT workbook includes a software enhancement form and a program manager checklist. The software enhancement form will be used when funds are being requested to provide software enhancements to existing ADT systems. For more info, please refer to the ADT goals and objectives found in the current recipient guide. The program manager checklist is an internal form used to ensure ADT criteria has been appropriately addressed within the work plan. This checklist can be helpful when creating your work plan to ensure you're addressing the ADT goals and objectives. Illustrated on this slide are the ADT and Umbrella workbook cover pages that will need to be completed. The text in red font provides additional instructions. On the Umbrella cover page, highlighted in green, includes a funding chart. This chart will need to be completed and broken out by direct and indirect costs. It should also accurately reflect the funding provided for each program based on your request. Please note, funding is based on your approved chart on the cover sheet of your workbook. Shifts between amounts for each program in the chart are unallowable. Also, highlighted in red at the bottom of each example, the ADT workbook has 1 work plan and accomplishments tab, whereas the Umbrella workbook has a work plan and a report tab for each program. Here's an example of what a work plan and accomplishment report tab looks like for ADT and Umbrella. As mentioned in the previous slide, the Umbrella template will have a work plan and an accomplishment tab for each program. The example shown here is for Avian. Both templates will have a metrics-driven goals column, which is highlighted in green. The content in this column is created by VS program staff and cannot be edited. Highlighted in yellow, both templates have a proposed activity column that will need to be completed as part of your work plan development. If you do not have activities for one of these objectives outlined, then indicate NA next to the objective in the proposed activity column. If you have additional activities for an objective, please insert a new line for that objective. If there are additional objectives that are not outlined in the metric-driven goals objective column, please contact your program manager to negotiate and determine if the objective is within the scope of the project. If agreed upon, new objectives can be added at the bottom of the spreadsheet. Highlighted in red, the templates will have 4 columns which represent accomplishment reporting for each quarter. Once the workbook is approved, it should be maintained throughout the life cycle of the agreement. Accomplishment data will need to be added quarterly to the workbook and submitted in EasyFed grants in PDF format. Lastly, the ADT workbook has additional reporting tabs within the workbook. However, Umbrella will have additional program-specific reporting. Here's an example of the Umbrella Financial Plan template. The layout is similar to the ADT Financial Plan. Just a couple of friendly reminders. Embedded on both the ADT and Umbrella Financial Plan templates are instructions for certain cells. In order to see these instructions, you will need to place or hover your cursor in the cell that contains a red triangle at the top right corner, and the instructions should appear like the example circled in blue. Please note, if you have recipient share, please illustrate these costs in the corresponding column in the financial plan. As a reminder, additional lines can be added to the ADT Financial Plan. However, if additional lines need to be added to the Umbrella Financial Plan, please contact your grant specialist. When developing your financial plan, here are some things to keep in mind. Refer to the Financial Plan Appendix in the Grants and Cooperative Agreements Guidance. This appendix outlines the types of details we are looking for when reviewing the financial plan. For example, for personnel, list the rate per hour, number of hours, or percentage of effort and salary rate for each position. For travel, include the estimated number of miles and rate per mile for local travel. For any out-of-state meetings, conferences and trainings, include the number of travelers, total number of days, per diem rate, lodging costs for each out-of-state event. If costs per test are included in the work plan and accomplishments tab, ensure those rates are correctly documented in the financial plan. Triple check all of your calculations. If there are any discrepancies noted during the work plan review, your work plan will require revision. Ensure the total federal amount is a whole number. Submit a current copy of the negotiated indirect cost rate agreement with your workbook if indirect costs are included in the financial plan. Recipient cost share or cost match is not required except for a 40% match for brucellosis eradication activities. However, if you incorporate cost share or match and it is approved as part of your workbook, then it will be incorporated in your cooperative agreement and it is legally binding. You would report any actual recipient costs on the SF425 financial report and verify that you have met the agreed upon amount by the end of the cooperative agreement period. Lastly, keep a file of all your supporting documentation to show how costs were determined. Now I will go over the application process, notifications, documents, and reminders. Once your workbook has been approved, here is an overview of the application process. The opportunity information will contain an opportunity number and is emailed to the recipient. The recipient applies to the opportunity by searching for the opportunity number. The program manager reviews it. If revisions are needed, the application is sent back to the recipient. Once approved, a risk assessment is conducted using information found on sam.gov, including the Federal Awardee Performance and Integrity Information, also known as FAPIS, and the single audit. If there are no findings during the risk assessment, the application will be fully approved and the agreement will be created and routed for signatures. If we do find something, we may contact the recipient for further information. Here is an example of an opportunity notification. For application documents, the SF424 and SF424A will be completed in the system. Please note the SF424A must match the approved financial plan. Forms to be completed outside EasyFed grants and attached to the application include the approved workbook, certification regarding lobbying
for cooperative agreements exceeding 100,000, the SFLLL disclosure for lobbying activities for cooperative agreements exceeding 100,000 when there are activities to disclose, the SPOC letter, if applicable, and a signed negotiated indirect cost rate, if applicable. Representations and certification, also known as certs and reps, must be completed in SAM.gov when renewing the yearly registration. This slide pertains to the Intergovernmental Review of Federal Programs, or commonly known as the SPOC process. Not every state participates. However, if your state does participate in this process, a copy of the response from the SPOC must be included with your application package when applying to the opportunity. The link to the current SPOC list can be found in the appendix section of the guide. You will be notified via email when the opportunity is ready for you to apply, along with an approved copy of the workbook, which you will need to upload with your application. New funding opportunity numbers are created each year. Do not use prior year funding opportunity numbers. Once an application is created, edit the application. Do not create a new one. The original created application should be accessed through the Actionable Items section in EasyFed Grants. On the SF424, under Block 16, list the congressional districts. For A, applicant, list the congressional district for your organization headquarters location. For B, program project, list the congressional district where the activities will occur. You can list statewide or all in this block if needed. Under Block 18, include cost share under the applicant line if applicable. In Box 19, when making your selection, please choose A or B. Option C is typically not a valid choice. On the SF424A, sections A, B, D, and F must be completed. Include cost share in sections A, B, and C when applicable. On the Additional Details tab for a done CCR exempted entity question, please respond with no. All recipients must have a DUNS or UEI number. In order to activate the complete signature option on the application, the signatory official will need to read and agree to the legal notice terms and conditions. For returned applications, please refer to the Comments tab for information on why the application has been returned to make corrections before resubmitting. Now I will start reviewing post-award processes, which include claim submission, reporting, both financial and performance, amendments, and budget shifts.
EasyFed Grants does not automatically generate claims. When you are in EasyFed Grants, select Create Claim from the left-hand menu to begin a claim request. Only one claim can be processed at a time. Claims should be submitted in chronological order with no gaps in time. Reimbursement claims should be submitted quarterly, and advance request claims should be submitted on a monthly basis. Lastly, an advance request claim will not be accepted for the final claim. When creating a claim, please reflect the actual expenses by cost category in the Requested Amounts by Cost Elements section of the claim, or you may include the breakdown of expenses as an attachment to the claim. Please ensure that the attachment is in PDF format. You may notice when the cooperative agreement is initiated in EasyFed Grants, the funding is allocated to the other line on the budget. This is due to some system limitations that do not allow us to properly reflect indirect costs and minor budget changes. However, we do track cost details to properly manage the cooperative agreement. Please keep in mind that both financial and performance reports must be current for the claim to be processed. Once the report is past due, the system will not allow us to process any pending claims. Once final approved, payment for the claim should be issued within 7 business days. For the umbrella agreements, each claim submitted is required to be broken down by program and cannot exceed the approved funding amount for each program. Shifting funds between programs is not authorized. Attaching a completed chart, like the example seen on this slide, on the Attachments tab of the electronic SF270 claim in EasyFed Grants will satisfy this requirement. In addition, please include the direct and indirect costs for each program. Failure to submit a breakdown with your claim may result in a delay of payment and does not comply with the cooperative agreement terms and conditions. If you do not wish to use this chart, you will need to submit a hard copy SF270 by program using the vertical columns on the form, with your overall electronic SF-270 claim and EZ-Fed grants as attachments. The approach may require you to submit more than one hard copy SF-270 with your claim.
Here's an example of Section 11 of the hard copy version of the SF-270. Please note, columns A, B, and C are outlined to illustrate the use of these columns. Because there are only 3 columns, an additional SF-270 may need to be completed for one claim if more than 3 programs are funded. As illustrated in the chart, EZ-Fed grants names reports according to calendar year quarters, so please keep this in mind when submitting your quarterly reports in the system. If a cooperative agreement has been granted a no-cost extension, then reporting will continue with the same frequency as provided in the original funding period. For example, if reports were due quarterly, they will continue to be required quarterly.
Performance and financial reports are required to be submitted in EZ-Fed grants in accordance with the frequency outlined on the award phase sheet. The report templates become available for submission in EZ-Fed grants on the last day of each quarter. Reports are due 30 days after the end of the calendar quarter, except for the final report, which is due no later than 120 days following the expiration or termination of the agreement. All the reports are grouped in a common actionable item list and are made available to all users from the same organization, which include the grant administrative officer, grant processor, and signatory official. Any of these users can open, complete, and submit the report. Users may filter the reports by their name in the point of contact column. Once a user accesses a report from the common actionable items list, the report will be automatically placed in the user's personal actionable item list. Once the report is assigned to a user, it will not be visible to other organization users. This report assignment is valid for 1 day. All report edits and updates will be saved, including report status. If the report is not completed or submitted within 1 day, the report work item will automatically be routed to the common actionable item list for other users to act on. If additional time is needed to submit a report, then please submit a written request for extensions to the program manager before the report deadline. The program manager will provide their decision in writing. However, even if an extension is granted, claims cannot be processed in EZ-Fed grants until all required reports have been submitted. Please note, at times, the due date listed on the report may be inaccurate. Refer to your award phase sheet for correct due dates. Lastly, EZ-Fed grants will generate 2 reports for the final quarter of the agreement, that quarter's report and the final report. Since we do not require 2 reports to be submitted, we will mark the last quarter's report as withdrawn, and you will only be required to submit the report marked final. If you would like to submit both a quarterly report and a cumulative report, then please attach both to the final report in EZ-Fed grants.
Next, let's review how to locate reports in EZ-Fed grants. This is a partial view of what you will see when you log into EZ-Fed grants. In order to complete your reports, you must access them through the actionable items on your home screen. Select Reports from the drop-down in the Actionable Items section, then click on the report that you would like to complete and submit. When reports generate, they are now available in the Common Actionable Items section for all recipient organization contacts, which include the grant's administrative officer, grant processor, and signatory official. Any of these users can open, complete, and submit the report. In conclusion, reports can only be edited through actionable items. Searching for items in EZ-Fed grants does not permit you to make edits on them. On the financial report, you will notice some fields will be auto-populated by the system, whereas others will need to be completed within the form. Ensure that the amounts shown in the form reflect the cumulative amounts, including the information for indirect costs. If there are indirect costs, Block 11 must be completed. If a new rate has been negotiated, attach a copy of the newly signed indirect cost rate agreement to the report in order to support the change in rate. If you have cost share or cost match that has been approved as part of your cooperative agreement, reflect your share of expenditures in the recipient share section. On the final financial report, an amount should not be listed for federal share of unliquidated obligations. If there is an amount listed on this line, it usually means we have advanced funds to you that remained unspent by the close of the agreement and would require repayment to us. If you have funds that have been paid to you but remain unspent, then work with your grant specialist to return the funds to us. If there is an unobligated balance of federal share on the final federal financial report, this amount will be deobligated in the closeout process. As mentioned earlier, the workbook includes space for quarterly accomplishment reporting. Therefore, please use the workbook to update your accomplishments each quarter to correspond to the proposed activities. When completing the performance report in EasyFed grants, we request that you upload the workbook accomplishments and any additional required reports to the Attachments tab of the performance report instead of using Block 10 Performance Narrative. When attaching the report, please indicate See Attached in Block 10 of the generated form. Double-check that the correct attachment is included. Once a report has been submitted, it can be returned by the program manager. However, if it is accepted by the program manager, it cannot be edited, and any corrected reports would need to be submitted via email. In conclusion, some of the programs require additional reporting. These reports can be found in an appendix section of the guide. Recipients are required to maintain an inventory and conduct a physical inventory every 2 years for property and equipment purchased with cooperative agreement funds. This includes items purchased under prior year cooperative agreements. Currently, there is no OMB approved inventory report for use. Please use the inventory log spreadsheet provided in the guide until official inventory report is posted to the OMB website. Please note if you will be getting rid of property or equipment purchased in part or in whole with federal funds from the current cooperative agreement or prior year cooperative agreements, then please contact your program manager for disposition instructions first. Next, Tanya will be discussing the amendment and closeout processes.
Thank you, Lourdes. In the next few slides, I will be going over changes that require prior approval. These deviations and/or amendments must be requested in writing prior to the change occurring and before the expiration of the cooperative agreement. A minimum of 30 days notice is recommended for us to have sufficient time for processing. Types of amendments include changes in project scope or objectives, even if there is not an associated budget change. Note, these changes cannot be approved after September 30th due to federal appropriation limitations. No cost extension request. Per the terms and conditions, you have the option of a one-time extension of the period of performance for up to 12 months. The request must be submitted at least 10 days prior to the expiration of the cooperative agreement and cannot be approved to solely spend unobligated funds. For extensions of time, written justification including why approved goals and objectives were not met during the agreement period and/or delays in accomplishments must be provided along with the new end date requested. Approved no-cost extension requests will also require submission of a revised SF-424 in order to route the amendment in EasyFed grants. Please note, extensions may affect the start of the next cycle's cooperative agreement depending on the justification provided. Increases or decreases to the cooperative agreement amount and/or cost share. Changes or disengagement of key personnel for more than 3 months or 25% of the performance period. Inclusions of costs that require prior written approval in accordance with 2 CFR 200.407. Transfer of funds budgeted for participant support costs. Subawarding, transferring, or contracting out any work not already approved in the initial cooperative agreement. This does not include acquisition of supplies, materials, equipment, or general support services. And last but not least, budget shifts. Since budget shift requests are the most common requests we see, I'm going to cover these in more detail. First and foremost, budget shifts cannot be approved for shifts between program allocations and must remain as outlined in your approved work plan funding chart. Budget shift requests for changes within a program only should be submitted in writing to the program manager and address the following 5 questions. 1. What is the amount of the shift? 2. Justification to explain why the shift is occurring. 3. What direct cost category is the funding being shifted from and to, for example, from personnel to travel? 4. Will the original objectives still be met? 5. Will this shift impact the scope? As mentioned previously, any scope changes must be made prior to September 30th. Furthermore, if the cooperative agreement is over the simplified acquisition threshold of $250,000 and there is a cumulative shift of more than 10% amongst direct cost categories, then you will need to submit a revised financial plan in SF424A along with a written request for the budget shift. Requests meeting these thresholds require both APHIS program manager and signatory official prior approval before implementation. Even if shifts do not meet these conditions, we request that any shifts in your budget are communicated with the program manager so that we can determine if scope is being impacted, whether changes are allowable or reasonable, and to track cumulative changes in the approved budget. Please keep in mind all requested shifts must be received by VS Field Operations no later than 30 days prior to the expiration of the cooperative agreement. VS Field Operations will inform the recipient in writing of our decision. Written approval is needed prior to implementing any changes. Lastly, VS Field Operations may not approve budget changes to allow purchase of general purpose equipment in the last quarter of the performance period, if it appears the modification is being made to solely use unobligated funds. Examples of general purpose equipment are office equipment, GPS, cameras, and computers. If the changes being requested require a formal amendment to the agreement, this illustrates the workflow of the routed amendment in EasyFed grants. Please note, not all amendments require all these steps to become active, and some steps may occur outside EasyFed grants to initiate the amendment. For example, no cost extension requests. Now, let's go over closeout eligibility requirements, notifications, and records management. A closeout is required in every agreement once the end date has been reached or if the agreement has been terminated. Once the agreement has ended, the following documents are required to be submitted within 120 days. A final performance report, final federal financial report or SF425, final claim request or SF270, and if applicable, return of any unused funds. Failure to provide these items on time may result in a delay in your payments and/or funding of future projects. A closeout cannot be created for agreements when an amendment to the agreement is in progress, there are any missing reports, a claim is being processed, there's a third-party active audit or pending litigation, or the agreement has not reached its end date. When these conditions have been met, the agreement will be formally closed out in EasyFed grants. This includes the obligation of any remaining unobligated funds as reported on the final SF425 Federal Financial Report. The system will send out automatic reminders to the recipient at least 30 days prior to the expiration date of the cooperative agreement. Illustrated on this slide is an example of the email notifications sent from EasyFed grants when an agreement is ending. Records retention is required for purposes of federal examination and audit. This is in accordance with the requirements set forth in 2 CFR 200.334, which outlines once the agreement is closed, all records pertaining to the agreement should be retained for at least 3 years from the date of submission of the final report. Unless the agreement is under an audit or compliance review, then records must be retained for 3 years after all issues are resolved. APHIS may request that the recipient transfer records to its custody when there's a long-term retention value. If the records are transferred to or maintained by APHIS, the 3-year retention requirement no longer applies to the recipient. We have several useful resources available to you pertaining to cooperative agreements. Here are a list of resources that complement our presentation. The VS Field Operations Grants and Agreements Recipient Guide. The link to this can be found in the current fiscal year guidance email that was sent out. Web address to the Electronic Code of Federal Regulations. Web address to the APHIS Terms and Conditions, which will also be available via link on the award phase sheet that is issued once the agreement is executed. The APHIS Agreement Services Center Recipient Training PowerPoint. Additionally, this is a link to the EasyFed Grants landing page that not only contains job aids for navigating the system, but also upcoming training opportunities. If you are unfamiliar with EasyFed Grants or need to brush up on using the system, we highly recommend utilizing this resource. Lastly, if you'd like to request a one-on-one call or training, please reach out to your grant specialist and/or program manager. If you have any questions or comments regarding this training, please direct them to the email address you see on your screen. Thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to working with you.